Hello everyone, my name is Ryan and I am an atheist for humanity. Today I'm going to be responding to the website whyislam.org and their claims about science in the Quran. These are basically that the Quran references advanced knowledge which is confirmed by modern science and could not have been known by Muhammad. Now, for brevity's sake, I've taken 3 examples from their webpage. The address is down below, and I'm going to talk about why these examples don't qualify as science or as advanced knowledge. Also, before I start, I just wanted to say that as an atheist and as an outsider to the Quran, when I read these verses, they didn't sound particularly advanced or special in any way. However, I can see why someone might interpret them that way. The commonality that we see in all these verses that these claims come from is vagueness. They're vague enough that you can make them fit with modern ideas. I'm going to start off with one claim about astronomy, and then we'll do 2 claims about embryology, about where humans come from and how babies are born. So the first one, I'm going to display an image from the website so you can see their claim and the verse that they're looking at. So look at that here. God is the one who created the night, the day, the sun, and the moon. Each one is traveling in an orbit with its own motion. Okay, so the first thing I want to say about that is that the paragraph above gives 10 times as much information as the quote does itself. And what's trying to be implied is that the quote is trying to convey all of that information, but we just weren't able to understand it. Unfortunately, that's just not true. The quote only says that the planets are in orbit and in motion. There is nothing about gravitational forces, masses, and their interaction between each other. That information just doesn't exist in that quote. And trying to pretend that that's what the quote is trying to say is a giant stretch. And really it's just a fabrication. Although this quote talks about the Earth, the Sun, the Moon, and orbits, it doesn't even clarify that the Earth goes around the Sun. And the idea at the time was that the Sun goes around the Earth. That came way back from Aristotle's time, which is the 4th century BCE, about 1,000 years before this. Aristotle and others put forward the idea that it was the Sun that went around the Earth. And that's the idea that became popular and held out for many centuries. Although there was a contemporary of Aristotle named Aristarchus of Samos, and he put forward the theory that the Earth goes around the Sun. Unfortunately, his idea didn't win out in popularity back then, but obviously he was correct. And he also deduced that the Moon is smaller than the Earth, and that the Sun is both larger and farther away than the Earth. Even though Aristarchus didn't get his calculations correct, as in he didn't have the correct sizes for the Moon and the Sun or the right distances, he had the general idea correct. There was another contemporary of Aristotle named Eudoxus of Cnidus, and he put forth the theory of homocentric spheres, which describes the universe in a series of concentric spheres. So he at least got the idea right that the larger object is surrounded by the smaller objects, and the smaller objects orbit the larger object. So these ideas were already out there centuries and centuries before the Quran was written. So unfortunately, to say that the Quran holds advanced knowledge in this area is just incorrect. These ideas were already out there. They've been floating around for about 1,000 years. They would have been known to people. So this verse isn't showing us any advanced knowledge that someone couldn't have known now. Okay, so next we're going to talk about where people come from. Right? The Quran actually differs slightly from the story in Genesis and the Bible. The principles are very similar, but the Quran kind of expands on it a little more. So what we're going to look at are, I'm going to show you two images, which include two quotes that go together and some of the author's commentary. So take a look at that first. God, who gave everything its perfect form. He first created man from clay, then made his descendants from an extract of underrated fluid. Then he molded him. He breathed from his spirit into him. Verily, I created humankind from a small quantity of mingled fluids. Okay, so in the larger quote, the underrated fluid is male semen. And in the smaller quote, again, what they're referring to is male semen. Now, in the 7th century, it is not an advanced or special idea that male semen is needed for production of human life. Everyone knows that. And to say that it only requires a small quantity of fluid is not really special either, because no one would call semen a large amount of fluid, right? And then in the bottom, it talks about, I'm sorry, in the second quote, the smaller one, it talks about mingled fluid. Now, in the commentary, the author is saying that this mingled fluid is actually referring to how sperm is made up of different components. Now, I seriously doubt that interpretation, because 1,000 years ago, Aristotle thought that male semen and basically menstrual blood is what created a baby. He thought that what was left after a woman's menstruation created the egg. So he knew that he had an idea that an egg was involved, but he was severely wrong about how it worked. And those were the fluids that were commonly referred to mixing. They thought that male and female sperm mixed, and Aristotle had thought that the menstruation blood is the female sperm. So this idea was already prevalent. So when we see this in the Quran about the mingled fluids, it's much, 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 much more likely that they were talking about male and female fluids. And that would actually be really inaccurate, right? Babies don't come from male and female fluids, right? They come from a male fluid and female egg, right? That's the thing. The ovum is never mentioned in the Quran at all. So to claim that there's advanced knowledge about how babies are created, but never mentioning the ovum or a lot of other specifics, really hurts this idea that Muhammad was handed down, advanced knowledge from a god. Because we're really not seeing anything new. We're seeing a rehashing of old ideas, which once again came from the Greeks about 1,000 years ago. And we're not seeing any corrections or specific information coming from the text. There's just a lot of these one-liners that are very vague, again, right? So you could interpret them to mean something accurate, but the verses don't prove that they have that extended and specific knowledge in any way. It's all very general. This verse doesn't reflect anything that we know today about evolution, biology, and the details about the building blocks of life. Rather, it's still all very magical and fictitious. Okay, so the third example is going to relate to the last example that we just did. And I'm going to display an image again so you can read the verse and some of the commentary from the author. And then I'll comment. God fashioned humans from a clinging entity. The quote here says, I fashioned the clinging entity into a chewed lump of flesh, and I fashioned the chewed flesh into bones, and I clothed the bones with intact flesh. First, the smaller quote. It says, God fashioned humans from a clinging entity. Wow, Well, at first glance, you might be looking at that and thinking, that's kind of interesting, because I know that the egg clings to the fallopian tube before it descends into the uterus. So that sounds pretty accurate. But what we have to ask is this advanced knowledge for the 7th century? And the answer is no. Again, Aristotle in the 4th century BCE, he had studied the reproduction of chickens and other animals very closely, and he wrote about it in detail. One of the things that he saw was that in the process of the development inside an egg, you could crack an egg open and there would be a point where it would be fertilized, but the only thing that you see is a small red dot. So this is where the idea comes from of a clinging entity, which used to be translated as blood clot. So clinging entity, the word for that in Arabic is alaka. Now that word literally means clinging. So I do agree that the new translation is a more accurate translation. However, this was always previously translated as blood clot, even though what the word meant was clinging. And I think it's pretty obvious that the reason for that is that people had always agreed with the idea, coming way back from Aristotle, that what is clinging is something like a blood clot. That's the most that they knew about it. So that shows us that, again, there's really no advanced knowledge here, because here's an opportunity to correct old misinformation, but it's not done. We're not given that level of detail again. The second quote, the larger one, gives us a little more detail. And it says that the clinging entity turns into a chewed lump of flesh. Now, the author says that that is an accurate description of what an embryo looks like at a certain stage. Yet, the thing about that is that I think you could come up with a lot of synonyms for what it might look like at a certain stage, and they would all be pretty accurate if you used your imagination. So I don't think this shows the real specific advanced knowledge that we're actually looking for. So then it goes on to say that I fashioned the chewed lump of flesh into bone and wrapped flesh around the bone. Well, again, sorry, this is common sense, right? Babies come out with their bones on the inside. Okay? There's nothing special about this comment at all. It really is just a common sense statement that we are formed with our bones on the inside. So the reality is that the Quran is not giving us advanced knowledge, right? It's not going into detail, nowhere near the detail that we know today. And it's not giving any sign that it knows more than what was known in the world at that time. So unfortunately, none of these quotes qualify as modern science or advanced knowledge. So those are the only examples that I have for you for time's sake. Please look at the address below and go visit the website and take a look over. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Remember, I am Ryan and I am an atheist for humanity. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comment section. I will respond. Hit that subscribe button for more videos like this. They will be coming out about every week or so. So if you have any suggestions on things, on topics that I should do, or questions that you'd like me to address, please leave them in the comment section. Let me know. Give me some fuel for fire, and I will have something new for you next week. Thanks for watching. The ovum is never mentioned in the Quran at all. So that is another big blow to this idea that there's any advanced embryology. How would you say that? Embryologic knowledge? Shit. Ruined that.